Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I really, really appreciate it. Alexandra, thank you for joining. It's so exciting to have you here. I think we were just giving people a couple seconds to join, but it looks like we're good to go.
Great.
Amazing. Well, welcome to everyone. This is officially the virtual book launch for my first real publication. So thank you all so much for spending your afternoon, midday, evening, wherever you are in the world with Alexandra and I. Thank you so much. Alexandra,
Yeah.
where are you today?
Well, I'm dialing in from London, so it's late afternoon here. I actually just came in from Copenhagen, but so over here in Europe, we're all dialing in to celebrate you, Kristin, and the book. It's so exciting. I think today is the actual launch day. Is that right?
That is
Yes.
right. We are launching it together. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Alexandra, everybody, is the CEO of Evident and co-CEO, I would even say, but powerful woman in artificial intelligence. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your time and participating in today's webinar. We are celebrating the launch of my book, Return on Intelligence, but we also just want to have such an important conversation about the leadership era that we're in, the things that we see that need to change, and how we're scaling AI at BMO, but then also some of the things that Alexandra and I, have seen across the industry as it relates to scaling AI. So we're going to have a pretty deep, fun, hopefully, conversation with all of you today. We really do welcome your participation in the chat. We will try our best to get to all of it as we can. And yeah, I just couldn't be more thrilled to do this with an AI leader such as yourself, Alexandra. This is a moment where scale is necessary, speed is necessary, but then also governance is such a critical component to this. We can't outpace the innovation without bringing governance all along. So from your vantage point across the financial institution sector, I wanted to just ask, are you seeing the same pattern? Are you seeing heavy AI investment and then some uneven results? And then you
No.
can even open up however you want to. You can talk about Evident. We don't have to dive into
No,
content right away.
well, we have an hour, which is fantastic. And I think everyone knows this is, shoot your questions into the chat. There's so much to talk about because I think, Kristin, you're launching a book at a time that it could not be more important for a book like this to be out there. So this is really, we've sort of been in 3 years of testing, right? And now we're really in this moment of putting AI into production and thinking about the governance and the leadership and the trust and what it takes. And you are at the sort of the helm, obviously, at BMO in driving this. So you see it firsthand, in the engine room. And so therefore, having a book out that gets into the nuts and bolts of what you are seeing is so important for the entire sector. And it's not just the banks, it's all of the financial services verticals, the insurers, the payment platforms, the asset managers, and beyond financial services, all of the things that you point to in the book on the things that need to be thought through, on what the CEOs and the boards need to know, what the tech teams need to know, and the non-technical people. But I do want to answer your great question in a minute, but I do actually just want to take a second or two just also to celebrate you, Kristin, because while you were busy leading the helm over at BMO up in Canada, you had time to write this book, and it's no easy thing to walk and chew gum at the same time, which is running a big team, but also sitting down and penning what you're seeing and getting a book out into the world. But not only have you published this book today, you've also been awarded top 100 leaders in the world on AI, which is amazing. Congratulations. and
Thank
also the
you.
number 21 AI women leaders in the world. This is a big deal. And so I do think, just for everyone dialing in or listening in later, just a second here to sort of lift our hats to you, Kristin, for this accomplishment, and to to have achieved all of that, and in addition putting the book out into the world. But I think that I'd love to. I think we're going to get into all of these questions around execution and ROI and jobs and governance and even policy and things like that. But I did want to just maybe just throw you a question before we maybe revert back to the one that you threw me, which is that your book opens with the bold idea that intelligence is not actually a tool. I think a lot of people think about AI as a widget, and you just plug it in and it's a tool. But you call it out as an infrastructure. And so maybe we should actually start there and take us through the thinking based on, I know it's based on sort of how you worked with AI through the years, but why should it not be considered a tool, and why should it be considered infrastructure?
So thank you for celebrating those moments with me today, and I really have such an incredible team behind me as well. So all of this is a reflection of BMO and the team and everything else that goes along with it. So AI as infrastructure is a really important shift in how we think about AI at BMO. And it means that it infiltrates all that we do. So we don't want it to just be a tool. We want it to be able to catapult insight. So we're our data fabric and our data layers, we want them interwoven so that we can have intelligence presented to us everywhere we go and everywhere we turn. And really the only way to do that is if you treat the subject, and in this case, the subject is AI, if you treat that as infrastructure, as a foundational component that spans the organization, versus being a point in time solution or one tool set that you then go and engage with that tool, and then you leave the tool and you do something else, and then you go back to the tool to engage it. So we want to infiltrate the whole organization with a foundational layer that interweaves the data, have a decision framework and an insight engine on top of that, so that we have that true intelligence at our fingertips everywhere we turn. That's the end state goal and desire. And that's really that shift in what I mean by we need to start treating this as infrastructure. Just as we do data today, we treat data as an infrastructure layer.
And I think that, so you mentioned in the book that, you see, and maybe in the early days and at BMO, but you probably see it across the sector, this sort of people can get stuck in point solutions, and they look at sort of use cases as the unit, and are doing a little here and a little there. So what would your advice be for banks that are sort of maybe earlier on the journey to what's the way to get away from point solutions and into having that cross-organizational layer? What do you do? What are the first steps?
So the number one thing is thinking of this from business value. And that sounds intuitive as we say it, and we want it to be intuitive, but it would surprise you that organizations don't always think of business value first. What often happens is the latest and greatest widget or the loudest thing in the news cycle gets all the attention. Well, I just have to have this hot new car or this hot new topic or this hot new tool. And that's the thing that we want to go and buy and procure and do something off of. And we think that the business value will just come because we bought this fancy new thing. And instead, at BMO, we're taking a very intentional approach to AI, and we're saying that we are We're digital first, AI empowered for business value. And it means that we as operating group leaders and as different segment leaders, we're coming to the table saying that here's the business problem, here's the value that it brings to our teammate or to our client, and that value is then taken away, and we try to find the right solution to the value expectation that we have for it. And you have different layers for value. Sometimes it's revenue, sometimes it's cost takeout or an improved risk posture, but that business value needs to be one of those things.
Kristin, do you think it's important for, when we're moving into sort of further into 2026, right? There's a lot of discussion, it has been for a bit, but it's intensifying on the ROI bit. Is that something that banks should think about ahead of deciding what to prioritize? In terms of, do you think that it is, you really kick the tires on what the expected value will be, try and really map out what that is? At a revenue uplift? Is it a productivity gain? Or do you think there's also equal value in experimentation? Because I think I also picked that up reading your book, there can be a tension for that sort of maintaining that innovation mindset and trying things, but also being quite strict in terms of focus. How do you manage that tension?
So it's interesting. Experimentation's great, and we want people to start thinking about, how would I leverage AI to solve X? So we want it to be part of that conversation and part of our leaders every day as they show up. We want to change that narrative a little and have them think about, okay, how would I use Copilot, or how would I use whatever, whatever it is as part of that day-to-day solutioning. But when it comes to return on investment, we are definitely seeing that narrative coming straight at us across the industry. What's the value that we're actually bringing to the table with this? Because right now, experimentation across most firms has led to the 1,000 flowers blooming situation. Yeah. And so one of the things that is in the book on purpose is that this is return on intelligence, because I was thinking through, and I lived through this, Alexandra, as I know from your successful career as well. I was in the Lean Six Sigma days, and quite frankly, only a few firms were truly able to catapult and see the value of that program. And so I spent a considerable amount of time reflecting on that ahead of writing our strategy for our firm, but then clearly also ahead of writing the book. And one of the things that I realized from the past was that the balance sheet discipline of how do you capture the value from improving a process or improving productivity, how do you capture that back to the balance sheet? Often we would save, Alexandra, I know that Copilot's saving you an hour a day, at least on emails, if not more. But how do we say, what, that value that hour is bringing to Evident is X dollars on the balance sheet or to your investors, right? That discipline is often absent because human nature is sort of just to fill that hour with something else productive. And so we never really fully capture some of that benefit. So I wanted us to start thinking about in the industry, and quite frankly, across all industries, because the book wasn't just written for financial services. How do you start talking about and introducing to your operating leverage formula? How do you introduce this return on intelligence? Because if I'm going to help make with the infrastructure, the whole organization smarter, more insight driven, how do I measure that so we don't end up in the same situation we did with Six Sigma? And so that's a little bit of the financial math, the algorithm that I put into the formula that I put into the book is to try to test. We'll see if it's right or wrong, but at least it's starting the conversation of there's a lot of banks, a lot of companies in the global 2000 that are putting up very solid numbers to
Mhm.
their earnings calls and to their shareholder reports saying that they're going to get a return. And so um, how do you measure that? And so this is that the return on intelligence is sort of like a second part to the operating leverage conversation of trying to capture that value throughout an organization. And so yeah, that's
And then, in addition, you also introduce, this idea of economic legitimacy. And I think that's the point about, being able to justify the investments, right? Being able to measure the returns. Is that the term economic legitimacy? Is that what you mean by that? So leadership can,
it
yeah,
really
they just,
is. It really is because at the end of the day, we want to know that the infrastructure is working, that it is giving us the value that we expected it to give us. And
yeah,
really, if you're not measuring it, how else do you know that it's returning that value? I just think that the old way or the traditional financial metrics way of doing it isn't going to be good enough for this environment, for this AI movement. And so I think we
yeah,
needed to rethink that formula,
yeah,
and that's what's in the book. And I keep going back to the book, one, because it's a book launch, but also, Alexandra, these were my notes, right? This is how we thought through it at BMO. This is how my team showed up every single day. These are sort of the cheat notes to how we chose to scale AI in our program. And then I'm just fortunate that my firm, we want our peers to do the right thing, because I know we're going to switch the conversation, but the other big part to this is, and one of the core arguments that I put in is that innovation without empathy is just efficiency without trust.
yeah,
And trust is so vital to the banking sector that we have to do this in a way that makes sure we instill confidence in our clients and we instill confidence in the sector and in our shareholders. And designing AI with empathy is really, in my opinion, the only way to go. And we're not necessarily talking about that enough. And so the book was written from my personal experience of doing this. And then I live and breathe this subject. And so my friends, all of you who are on the webinar, you all do this for a living too. And so in interviewing several of you who are probably participating today, so thank you for allowing me to do some of my research with you, because I put 43 examples from across the global 200 publicly traded companies. I put 43 examples into the book of how others are doing it as well. And so, yeah, the empathy conversation is really important. So from what you see, do you think that leaders are underestimating the human side of this, Alexandra, from the seat you're in?
yeah. I think it's such it's such a good question, and I think in many respects, this sort of human element is absolutely correct, Kristin. I think it's not discussed enough. I think there's a big focus, and as there should be, on the technology, on the platform architecture, right? The choices of vendors, the build and the buy. How do you and governance, which I'm sure we'll get back to as well. But there's sort of several layers to the human aspect, right? There's a leadership aspect, because a lot of the success that we see, and for those who don't know me on the call, we track and rank the 50 biggest banks in North America and Europe on their AI performance. And one of the key sort of components of that is actually on the leadership. So having a really, a CEO who's really dedicated to this and showing that this is important, that this is a number one priority, and making sure that everyone feels equipped and comfortable with what's going on, being very clear about strategy and about what's happening and what the benefits are, right? And making sure that people feel comfortable with the tools that are being rolled out, and also addressing some of the concerns of that there are around, will it displace my job? And so I think you also touch upon this in the book. This is augmentation, it's not replacement. But the human side of this, and that creating trust, not only internally, but also externally with your clients and customers of the bank is super important. But so bringing everyone on the journey, we find, is actually one of the most, critical things, and also making sure that people are fully trained in the tools that are being released, and an understanding of what they can do, and understanding that there's a certain amount of also creativity that is needed when you're running a line of business in a bank, right? And you're used to delivering on the financial components, that suddenly you also have to deliver on the AI components, but you're not having to do that alone, that you're given the expertise that can help you get there. So there is, the trust is built by having real clarity about what this will enable the bank to become, and what this will enable the employees to become, and what this enables for the customers to have something that can be trusted, something that is maybe more bespoke, something that has less friction. So I think this human element is so incredibly key to the rollout. It's not just the technology. So, but I'm sure, Kristin, and sort of back to you on the leadership, I'm sure you see that across BMO, but also when you look across the sector, that the way that is instilled, and that trust is built, is something that you can see when you're seeing some banks maybe doing better than others. So, and I also think that when, we of course also, we monitor, rollout of AI deployment across all the banks. We look at the ROI, and we have lots of conversations with the individual banks and the individual lines of business and so on what are the bottlenecks? What is it that can maybe make a rollout really hard? And some things would be around, is the architecture maybe not set up right? It could also be the governance structures are still maybe cumbersome. There's a new architecture of governance that is needed. But often, in fact, is actually just maybe human hesitation, as in, I've done this job for 20 years and I actually don't want to change my ways. And how do you help people get over that hesitancy? And that's very human too. It's very human nature to
It is.
set in our ways, right? Yeah.
It is.
I'm sure
So we have an incredible ally and partner, both in our CEO and then our Chief Administrative Officer, who's also our head of talent. And I should have not fumble on exactly what the title is, but Mona Malone, who wrote the foreword for the book, is just an outstanding professional in the HR space. So she is our chief HR officer as well. And the role and the decisioning and the approach for us is just one way that we get over and working through that human dynamic is that we made an active decision to provide AI to everyone. Every single employee from bottom to top has access to the same tool set. So we all have Copilot. We all are working off of that, all 55,000 employees. And then we rolled out training to all 55,000 employees. And that decision to include everyone on the journey in and of itself was, the foresight of leadership of Mona to make sure that everyone's included. Like, that inclusivity is such a critical component to the human nature of wanting to choose to accept something or not, if it's available for everyone. So I think that that was a really bold decision that we made, and that I feel gave us an advantage with that human connectivity. And then the reason why I emphasize innovating with empathy is because trust is earned when leadership can say with certainty, we know precisely how this agent behaves. We know where it draws its boundaries. We know how it's going to be monitored. And we know we're designing it for you. We know we're designing, and whoever the you is, whether that's our teammate or our client, we're designing it with that human at the end up front. So we know exactly who's going to be using it and interacting with it, and that flow and that ease of what it looks like in their hands is all part of the design. And Alexandra, I was just peeking at the questions that were coming in, and one of them was, as the CEO on Monday morning, what do I come in and ask or do differently? And one of them from that business desk, and which principle out of the 43, I start with the first one, which is the business before the buzz, the making sure as the CEO that your top 3 project initiatives that you're tracking and caring about are the ones that are going to drive, a basis point of value for your firm, and have someone walk you through so that you can see what that value is. I think that that's probably the first thing as a CEO, quarterback, Monday morning quarterback, whatever you want to call it, that I would do.
How technical do you think your CEO needs to be? Do you, does your CEO need to be using all the tools and trying them out and testing, or sort of walking the hallways and looking at workflows to think, oh, maybe this could be rethought? How much in the engine room do you think a CEO needs to be?
It's fun because I have BMO has a really engaged board, a really engaged CEO, a really engaged executive leadership team, and so we're fortunate that we have technically inclined individuals at the helm all the way through, and I get that that's unique. Not every institution is going to have that. And there always are varying degrees of expertise, but I happen to know ours rolls up his sleeve and is into the tech and is using it and leveraging the agents and is able to ask some pretty zinger questions now because he does have it at his fingertips. So, but does every CEO have to be super technically inclined? No. You don't, and executive leaders don't necessarily have to be incredibly inclined. But what I love about designing with empathy is that I want it to be as flawless of a design for the user as possible, that you're not feeling like it's super techy or super hard to interact with. I want it to be part of your regular workflow and design, and that you want to engage with it, and that it's easy to engage with. So that is part of the value of having an engineering team that is looking at this design component up front with empathy.
Yeah. And maybe also just and I'm sure there are lots of questions in the chat that we'd love to get to, but on the from our perspective, right, there's a lot of us tracking all of the components of rollout, and trust and the design is so important, as you say, Kristin. So it's comfortable. It becomes a tool that you just have in your system and that you use all the time. That is the best outcome, because it becomes second nature. But one of those bottlenecks that many face is this governance question, and trying to streamline the governance structures, because of course AI throws up a lot of new challenges, like how we actually monitor it and how we deal with it from a model risk management and governance and risk perspective. So maybe if you could talk us through a bit, sort of, what are best practices, and what have you seen working well? And it's something that everyone grapples with. So would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So governance absolutely is a vital part of the conversation. At BMO, we wrote, Muriel Peiselman is on our team and is a digital ethicist. And I had a lot of different participation from around the firm, our privacy leaders, our sustainability leaders, our general counsel. And we wrote our responsible AI framework and published it in our sustainability report. So all of you can see it. It's publicly available. And those are our principles for how we approach AI at BMO. And starting at that level of an expectation, then we're able to design our governance program to reflect those principles. So I think that tie-in is really important for your programs. And we want governance to be an enabler. And so one of the things we're focused on are performance evaluations that live with each agent, so that when does a model start to degrade. You can kind of see that in real time, so you can course correct, and degradation is just part of the game, and it's just part of it. But having a method in place that travels with an agent is really important. And it makes you present better results for your end user, better results for your clients. And so that governance is actually an enabler of more productivity and more efficiency. Look, we're all in the reality of this. We all understand the pain of monitoring and testing. And so I'm not trying to say it's all roses to do the governance, but we have all learned, especially in the financial sector, we all learned from the 2008 crisis. And we have to make sure collectively that we bring governance along with the pace of innovation, because we can't have another situation that the sector faced like we did in 2008. And so we're taking it very seriously. Quite frankly, all of our peers are taking that very seriously. And we have a lot of regulations that require us to take it very seriously. So the soundness of what we're doing is important. And that framework, mirroring it out that way with the dominoes, I think is really, really helpful for the listeners.
Yeah. That's so important. Everyone's grappling with that to try and design that so it sort of is seamless, as you say. And I guess in your view, it's ongoing, right? Because we're in the year, I think everyone talks about, we're in the year of agents, we're in the year of agentic AI, and sort of really grappling with what that means in terms of how it's going to change workflows, but also what it does put challenges on the governance side as well. And I think one of the many questions to ask you, Kristin, is also this question around a bank is a big organization that has a lot of legacy, and it's sort of I know you're moving very fast. But it still takes time to bring everyone along, right? And get the data in the right places you were talking about, and so on. How do you, but the technology is moving so quickly. And so the organization that can adapt to the latest innovations on the front end of technology, how do you organize yourself for that? I guess there's a certain amount of nimbleness that you also have to build into the system. So as a new model comes out or a new capability comes out, you'd want to be able to dive right in. So how do you build for that kind of agility?
So speed and agility are things that the financial sector is not necessarily known for. And one can say and that we're not moving fast enough. So there can be this feeling of us not collectively moving fast enough, and success is really seductive, right? You see the latest and greatest tool out there, you see your client doing something, or you see your competitor doing something in the news, and you're attracted to it. You really want to live in that moment with them, or be ahead of them. And so the pace is going to be something that all of us in this domain of managing and developing and implementing AI is going to have to really manage. And so for us, number one, I want all of my teams and my leadership to understand that I am with you. I want pace, and I want us to move as quickly and responsibly forward as possible. And so articulating what we're doing about pace is really important. I think something to hit back to all the time. So another trick is to then also articulate what your foundational components of your program that you're building and working on, so that people can anchor to that over and over again, that here's the things that we're building, and these things are so foundational that it's going to help us move faster. So if Alexandra, if I give you a Microsoft Agent Studio suite, and I've got some of the building blocks already prepared for you, and I hand that over to you, then you can do 1,000 other use cases with that. So we're really focused on those foundational capabilities and anchoring people back to those. And we don't also want to get in the way of authentic progress. People are in all parts of our organization are doing really good work, and we're not going to get in the way of that authentic progress. So we're going to let them keep moving forward, and we trust that we're all operating in those same responsible AI components. And then it's not just trust. Like at a bank, we're regulated, so we have to test and monitor and trust and verify that it's happening that way. So those are just some tricks, I think, to answer your question. I think one of the questions that I saw in the chat was around sensitive information. How do we handle that? And this is great for Alexandra, you and I to answer, because in banking, that's all we deal with, really, it feels like, is sensitive information. So for us, first and foremost, we make sure that our relationships with our big tech providers, that the sensitive information, our data, our special sauce doesn't ever leave our institution. So for example, a Microsoft large language model that they're making available to us, we train that model on BMO data, but Microsoft can't take that version or our model somewhere else and make their model better elsewhere. So we write that into our contract language with these providers. And that's one method of securing the sensitive information. And then there's other tricks, making sure that your SharePoint access sites have the proper permissioning. But I think that kind of answers that particular question that came in through the chat. Alexandra, do you want to add anything to that?
Look, it's got to be written into the contract, to your point, and that's what we're seeing across the sector. That that information, that data can't travel out, through these tools and outside of the bank. The contract has to be written so that data stays on-prem and is secured. And so, so I think that the providers are very, attuned to the needs of the banks and understand that has to be written in so sensitive data doesn't leak. because that would I mean, we were speaking about trust before. That would be, that is a no-go, right? It is a no-go for a bank. So other non-regulated sectors might be a bit more laissez-faire around these things, but it is absolutely not an option for a bank to have a setup where sensitive and privacy, gets leaked, or sensitive data gets leaked. It is it's part, but it is also now, I think there's a lot of questions around vendor vetting. So and trying to minimize the risk through making sure that the vendors themselves are fully up to date with the capabilities of keeping sensitive data on-prem, and there's other risks of other natures that can come in through the back door through vendors. So that is being scrutinized. And of course, when we enter this, where there's more agents deployed, there has to be real sort of tight parameters around that, and also around, what the agents are resting on, what information is underlying, so it doesn't inadvertently, leak or treat or take into account data that is sensitive and belongs only sort of in one part of the bank. So there's definitely a lot of thinking around that. So, so that's a very good question from the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Alexandra, I know you've heard me say this over the years, and this was something that I would say on stage with you at your Evident symposiums before generative AI popped up, that when it talks about, a lot of people think that AI is biased, and it's not. And so the thing that I remind people is that it's the human who's developing the algorithm in the first place, or the model, that's biased. We all have subconscious biases. Some of us have conscious biases, and that's what we bring when we are doing. And that's also why empathy is so important, is to take that all into consideration. And so I think one of the things too is to myth bust, because we need to be bringing our risk partners along, our audit partners along. We need the power of all we call them risk stripes, all the different lines of defense. We need everyone journeying this with us. And so the other thing to kind of myth bust is that these agents aren't just going to go rogue today. With today's technology, and probably for the next few years, it's not just going rogue. It's the human who put it into that container, who said, we want you to take on these characteristics, or that they didn't think through the kill chain, right? So if I told an agent to just end a process if it finds something going wrong, you have to think through what you're asking the agent to do. So it's still the human who's going to be bringing these biases and these judgments to the development. And so that's why it's a refresher and a reminder that the developers have a huge role in this, that we need to make sure they understand the power of the tools that are being put in their hands, but it's still the human, and not just the agent capability that can go off and go crazy. And we are shifting a little bit to the questions that you're putting into the chat. So we are just naturally kind of concluding our conversation a little bit here, Alexandra, and just shifting to some of the important questions that all of you have from the audience. So, yes,
I'll hand it back to you. I'm just trying to bring it back to the book, because we are today celebrating the launch day of the book. And again, Kristin, huge congratulations. And I know there's so many questions, and we'll get to them, but maybe just a few things on the writing process. I would love to hear, is there anything that was a great surprise to you when you did the interviews or in the writing process? Was the information that you pulled out where you're like, that was interesting, I didn't know that? You had 43 examples. Were there some of them that you were surprised by?
Thanks for, that's really sweet of you. The book writing process was something that I felt as a leader in this space, compelled to do, because how fast the technology is moving. There's no playbook for any of us. We had to figure it out, and I genuinely feel like the leadership part to the equation is the harder part to this. It's the tech for me is the easy part, and I don't want the industries to overlook that. And so writing the book was a passion, because I really want to make sure we all do this right, and that we don't leave someone behind in the democracy of the haves and have-nots. And I really wanted to try to do the right thing in sharing the playbook or the journey that I'm learning and doing. Or the trial by error kind of thing. And so I think what was really eye-opening to me was just how much everyone was struggling with the same thing. Everywhere I turned, everyone was having the same issue around, is this really going to work? Are people really going to adopt it? Tons of, oh, I don't want to adopt this. I don't want my life to change. Everyone seems to struggle with the fear of losing their job, losing their role. And the truth is we're not seeing that. We're not seeing job loss really in any sector due to the technology. Like in the media, and people can hide behind whatever truth or lens that they want, but really the technology itself has been more of an amplification and allows us to be better at how we show up every day. So I think those were some of the surprises, was just how much we were all in the same boat and kind of the same situations.
On the job loss, I mean, I would just echo that, because, as you know, Kristin, we collect data on everything, right?
Yes.
And look through the lens of that. But in terms of looking at the leading banks, those banks that are really leaning into AI, right? That is actually where we see the most headcount growth. And it does sound counterintuitive given what everyone's reading in the headlines, but actually it does make a lot of sense when you're looking at it from a perspective of there's still a lot of engineering that's needed for the Gen AI and agentic AI and all of the infrastructure that needs to be built. So there's hiring still of tech talent that is actually building these platforms. And then, and so what we also see is that in addition to that, and a lot of the use cases that we're tracking are internally facing. So there's a lot of productivity enhancements and the sort of focus on sort of onboarding and audit and fraud and things like that. But there's also a lot of investments into the front office roles in asset management, wealth management, and investment banking, tools that equip the analysts to do more with the same. But actually what they're finding is, because that suddenly becomes growth areas, the hiring headcount into where they've put really good AI tooling or AI infrastructure.
Right.
So not only are they, other leading banks hiring into the tech stack or the AI talent stack, but also hiring across the board because the bank is doing better. So we're seeing the opposite. We're actually seeing that the organizations that are leaning in are actually a growing headcount overall. So we don't see the job losses that are being talked about that are projected in the years ahead. We're not seeing that. And that doesn't mean that is not going to happen elsewhere. It might also happen with the organizations that maybe start too late on the AI journey. So they become a little bit less competitive and so on. So you might see some jobs going away simply because they're losing market share. But from the leaning into AI, we do not see job displacement, which is interesting.
That's an important nuance that you just made, Alexandra, with the firms that are leaning into AI. It's sort of net creation of jobs. The firms that are leaning out of AI are losing market share and could have job reduction or job loss, but it's because of market share. So, I've been talking lately about margin compression and margin
Yeah,
expansion, and you have got to be thinking about margin expansion. You have to,
exactly.
especially in this era, because parity is either there or coming. And so how do you differentiate and really focus on the differentiation? And human connectivity is a big way to differentiate. There was a follow-up question to the sensitive data. And do I trust putting P&L? Uh, I was just trying to see P&L info, et cetera, into the tool. Yes, I do trust it. We have controls set up. Where people are pulling data from is very well controlled. So yes, we put in our financial statement. Those are certain users, and but yeah, we put in our information. We have a tool running that accesses our policies and procedures. We're making our HR partners better, smarter, faster with agents as well. So we're comfortable putting in sensitive information because we have a controlled environment in place to do that.
There's another question that I'm going to read out to you because it's for you, Kristin. But before we get to that question, one that comes up a lot is talent. And we haven't touched on talent. And I just wondered if you could maybe briefly give us a sense of what does it take to attract really good talent, retain good talent, right? You've got amazing talent at BMO, but what does that take?
I think that it takes a relentless focus on hiring the best team, and I'm really, really incredibly proud of. We call each other the dream team. But there's not a more significant part of my job than managing the care and the growth of the individual every single day, every week, and so that the hiring, the performance management, the encouragement, that is your role as a leader, and it doesn't matter how high or low you are in an organization. Your team is everything, and the investment you make in the individual teammate is hands down one of the most important roles of a manager or of a leader. And so that value that I have for my teammates is part of attracting talent, and having great talent attracts more great talent. And we spend time talking to our people about, like, can you feel the difference? Can you feel like the value that we're bringing to the table? Can you see how important your role is to the results that we're getting? Like, we put people into the equation, along the way. So I think that that's just some of that. And then you can attract talent from other industries. You can attract talent from academia. There's a lot of places that you can go for talent pool, pulling in talent pool.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. There's a question here that I'm going to read out to you. What are your thoughts on seeking help for AI tools, builds, processes from the AI itself? Do we lose on novel thinking in this way? And are there risks to doing that? What are other recommended sources? So do we lose on novel thinking? And when we're seeking help from AI and other tools? So what are your thoughts on that, Kristin?
We need the vitality of a leader's role that will never go away, because this is entirely human, is to apply the thought leadership and the empathy to it. So we need to effectively challenge what it is that we're interacting with, and we need to apply that next level thinking to the process. And I want to make sure that at BMO, when we're leveraging these tools, that that we are reminding people that that's what makes us who we are, is to ask those and to stay multidimensional. I think that you do run the risk. So for the person who put in the question, I think you do run the risk of losing your novel thinking if you just trust ChatGPT to write your presentation or your narrative of whatever it is. I think you could lose that. But it's the effective challenge, and let it be an ideation tool for you. Those are ways to make sure that you stay, and we want that vitality that the human brings.
Yeah, there's another quick question. I think we've got time for a few more. I know we're running out of time, but someone is asking, how do we reconcile data residency requirements with the need to use the latest AI models, considering inference is stateless? Kristin.
Ooh, I like the techie questions. So the data fabric is an essential pillar to the conversation, and I have gotten personally so used to talking about AI, but first I was a data scientist, and so for me, when I talk about AI, I am talking about data. I don't, in my own head, I don't pause to think of those things as separate. But I still need to make sure that everyone else understands how vital data is to all of this. So the inference issue is around data drift. And so making sure that you have a data fabric layer, which means no matter where the data physically resides, having a way to pull in that mechanism to the right spot in your modeling process is really important. And the large language models degrade, as I was mentioning earlier, and that's where the inference is at risk. And when you have that data fabric layer, you can often see when something is missing or not. And so that relationship between the data fabric layer and your models is important, but having the performance evaluation that lives with the agent is the way that you'll see whether or not inference is being impacted, and all the other metrics as well. So it's really important to have a way to measure the performance of your agent. And it has to sort of be in a dashboard live in a way, because you got to be able to recognize when model changes happen, what's happening to your model. So we have 2 minutes. Let me just thank you, Alexandra, for your time and your expertise, and for joining me to celebrate. And then to all of you as well that joined us live for this webinar and who will join us to watch the replay. Thank you so much for, I think it's over 1,000 participants for joining and celebrating my big book launch. I hope that this time for you was valuable, but just your support and your encouragement and the mere fact of celebrating this with me, it means a lot. So thank you all so much. Alexandra, any closing thoughts for you?
Remind people that it's available on Amazon. I live in the UK, and I've just been on, and I can see that we can buy the book here in Europe if there's anyone dialing in from there. But I would just say, Kristin, huge congratulations, not only on the great work you do at BMO, but also on this fantastic book. I love that you are democratizing the process, creating more transparency, and giving everyone a little bit of a guidelines and ways to think about how to do this well and at pace. So I think everyone's going to enjoy reading this and get so much out of it. And it's been such a pleasure to know you for these years and for many years to come, and to celebrate this big day for you, Kristin. So huge congratulations, and thank you for everyone who joined. It has been a great pleasure to spend this hour with you on the great points in the book, but thank you.
Thank you. Until we return. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye. Bye.